you're a greedy bastard. Or at the very least, you have the potential to be. That's Dylan Ratigan's philosophy, a financial version of the good and evil in us all concept. And while he makes this point, his entire book, Greedy Bastards, hinges on the issue that our country is a veritable petri dish breeding ground for greedy bastards. Like sticking a heroin addict in a quiet, dark room with nothing but poppy plants, morphine, and an IV drip, and then acting surprised when they've stolen your cash and don't show up for work the next day. Our problem is that we allow greedy bastards to thrive. We celebrate them and their actions when we should be promoting the exact opposite behavior. And in his book, Ratigan outlines ways we can work to stop greedy bastards, rescue their victims, and shift our collective financial goals from short-term greed to long-term greed. But wait, that's still greed, which is bad. Life is shades of gray, actually. I like to think of long-term greed as another way of saying, think of the long-term consequences of your actions. If you want more, think of the best way of doing that. And you'll find that the best way to get more long-term is to not be a conniving shitstick short-term. For example, the best way of growing food is to grow it naturally, rotating crops and making sure that the earth stays fertile so you can continue to reap nutrient-rich crops from that soil for decades to come. So then, if you want more crops, use the same logic. And you're left with more food, more fertile soil, more fresh air, etc., etc. That may be greed too, but really it's just common sense. While I don't think that former senior partner at Goldman Sachs, Gus Levy, who coined the term long-term greed, would agree with me on everything, I think we can both agree on that common sense logic. Long-term gains are dependent on short-term decisions that not only take into consideration the gains of right now, but the consequences of those gains after you've pocketed your dollars and your bushel of carrots. It's a difference between planting that seed and making one in a lab. You may get food quicker, but who the hell wants a tomato with salmon genes? Yeah, that really did happen. Be it GMOs poisoning our bodies or out-of-control short-term greedy bastards poisoning our future, we have the ability to counter it all through that brand of common sense and local grassroots actions stemming from something as simple as gardening. We can't take the potential for evil out of all mankind, but we can make it impossible for those evil intentions to flourish. And we can make it impossible for greedy bastards to thrive. We can turn that opium den, that petri dish of corruption, into a system that runs on honesty, transparency, integrity, and long-sighted initiatives that reap the most benefit for the majority of people. Plant the seed for change, water it, give it some light, and watch that fucker grow. And here we go. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. So speaking of greedy bastards, they need fuel. Not just the obvious fuel of a vampire economy and government complicity, but they need fuel from you, your apathy, your silence. If they don't have that, they can't truly thrive. They're robbing you senseless. Just take a look at this graph showing the distribution of income over time, from 1949 to 2012. The blue represents the bottom 90%, and the red represents the top 10%. As you can see, we've gotten less and less of the economic growth pie over time. But in this last 6 years, we've gotten negative pie. We've been forced to throw up what little fucking pie we had left. Literally, not figuratively, we've been robbed. There are, of course, a myriad of factors that led to this appalling result, but none of these factors would have been allowed to ferment into this festering heap of inequality that we have today without our permission. And before you say, hey, I never said I was cool with that, I imagine you wouldn't. But our collective silence as a nation is their get-out-of-jail-free card, their meal ticket to gorge themselves on our futures. Silence is complicity. We didn't say enough, we didn't do enough, and we didn't force our government to deal with these greedy bastards. But enough about what we didn't do. Let's take a look at something we have done, and we've done a lot. People have been working hard to fight the influence of greedy bastards, and as we continue to do more, let's make sure that we amplify and spread our actions, for this is truly how paradigms and systems shift. And these actions can be small as just sharing a video, particularly if that video is a satirical spin-off of one of the most famous commercials in recent history. This week, we're highlighting just such a video from Otto Penzato and the Most Influential Man team. I would explain that title, but instead, I'll let you see for yourself.
He knows the best defense of democracy is an informed electorate. So he brokered corporate control of the news media. He knows America's tax system is fair because he helped write it. He believes welfare is a drain on the economy. Well, except for corporate welfare. He is, in fact, a member of the 99%. Not really. He just wants you to think he's one of you. He is the most influential man in America.
I don't always buy elections, but when I do, I buy American. Stay silent, my friends.
Stay silent, my friends. Oh, doesn't that just make you want to fucking scream? Otto Penzato and the Most Influential Man team have done a brilliant job of capturing that condescending, corporate, crony tone that makes you want to drop-kick a banker. And for those who feel that urge simmering to boil, head to their site because you'll notice a knowledge and action section. The apathy killers, the saboteurs of sickly silence. Because what the Most Influential Man really doesn't want is for you to know more, because it just might make you want to grab a pitchfork and spear the status quo. It might make you say something, do something. And that is what those greedy bastards fear most, our action. Us noticing that some shit is up and then doing something about it. Speaking of doing something, satire is but one of many forms of creative activism. In fact, creative activism is not always art. It isn't confined to any one medium or group of mediums. It is merely the act of thinking creatively about social and political issues, much like activism is simply the act of being aware of what's going on in the world. This next story highlights a place and a small group of people who are most certainly creative activists, and quite literally, grassroots activists. Soulfire Farm is a farm in upstate New York that in just 3 seasons has gone from a small family farm to a national leader in the movements for food justice and sustainability. In 2014, Soulfire partnered with the Freedom Food Alliance, a group of rural farmers, activists, artists, community members, and political prisoners who use food as an organizing tool to address food sovereignty, environmental, prisoner, and economic justice. How can food do all that? Leah Penniman explains.
I think we create a false dichotomy between environmental, land, and food issues and issues that are social and economic. I think that racism, unfortunately, permeates every aspect of our society. And so when you look at who has access to what types of food, it's very clearly along race lines. You know, even if you look at the USDA maps of so-called food deserts, where people can't get good food within a mile radius, those are very much along race lines. And so I think what the young people are speaking about is this real true reality that you know, even if they want to make a choice around good food, if you have $1 in your pocket and you go to the corner store, you can get hot Cheetos, you can get Takis, but you can't get an orange that looks decent. You can't get, you know, a nice healthy smoothie or a sandwich. It's just not accessible, and that isn't accidental. You know, I actually don't like using the term food desert because it implies something natural. The desert is a natural, beautiful phenomenon. I like to use the term food apartheid because it really is an intentional system of discrimination and separation that unfortunately we have in our society. And at the same time, these young people are facing, gun violence in their communities. And so I think what they're speaking to is just the sense that, even if we do our best, even if we try our best, there's still all these forces, the prison system, the education system, transportation, housing, that are sort of stacked up against us and aren't rooting for us, which does lead to this sense of like internal nihilism and hopelessness.
And so how do you feel that, just like you said, like you go down to the corner store and you can't get good food. How do you feel that the food and the farming activism that you're doing, how can you turn food into a catalyst for socio-political change to combat not just the aspect of access to food, but also the gun violence and the internal nihilism that you talked about?
Well, that's a great question. Well, just to be totally upfront, like I don't think there's one answer. I don't think that, just restoring land ownership into the hands of minorities and learning how to grow our own food is the only answer. I think we really need to be looking at this at a systemic level. But it's certainly part of the solution. And so some programs that I'm really excited about that I'm working on with Freedom Food Alliance with my friend Jalal Sabor is the Prison Bus Project. And so what happens when families join the Prison Bus Project, CSA Share, is they get that good food, right? And they can share that with their loved ones in prison who have access to the most horrible food. I mean, people are getting diabetes in prison left and right, or they can also have that food for their own families. And they get essentially a bus voucher. And so we have this beautiful painted bus that goes up to visit the different correctional facilities in upstate New York. And so families that otherwise would not have access to see their loved ones are getting to see their loved ones. And so, that's good on a personal level, but also on a political level. If you look at the likelihood of recidivism in prison, it's very correlated with whether people feel connected to their communities and their land. And so when you keep families reunited, that is the people who are imprisoned have more connection, empowerment, and more likely to return to their communities and kind of be in the struggle. And on the bus, we're using that as an organizing tool. So we have, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and other resources, and people are talking about, what kinds of actions we want to organize for Black Lives Matter. So that's an interesting way to kind of connect the issues. And then we have a restorative justice program on our farm where we have young folks who we worked it out with the Albany County DA that, instead of having to go to prison or, be on probation, they can do these training programs and volunteer programs in the community. And, when they come to our farm, they learn those skills that I had already mentioned, but then we're also doing essentially community organizing training with them about how to identify what are the problems in the system, to suggest policy changes, to organize with the New York State Prisoner Justice Coalition, and to go back to their own communities and teach some of the skills that they've learned. So really trying to help our communities be in an empowered role and a leadership role and not just sort of at the receiving ends and the brunt of all of this racism.
Thanks to Leah Penniman for being on the show. For more information on Soulfire Farm and to volunteer and donate, visit the link below. The work of Soulfire highlights a very important aspect of our work as activists, our job as citizens, and that's solidarity, working together. None of our issues can be taken as just a single issue in a vacuum. They're all inextricably tied to one another. The Black Lives Matter movement is the income inequality movement, is the environmental movement. Why? Because the system that devalues Black and brown lives is the same system that robs you, the same system that poisons our air, our water, and blocks our access to healthy, organic foods. If you want to fix one issue, find allies working on other issues, reach out to them for help, and offer your help in return. Put aside differences and see the bigger picture of our similarities. Find the red thread that passes through our stories, our movements, and grab a hold of it like a preschool kid on a field trip. Your issue needs my fight, and my issue needs yours. We are more similar than we are different. And that brings us to the Quote of the Day segment. Marjane Satrapi is an Iranian-born French graphic novelist, illustrator, film director, and children's book author. Her 2007 film Persepolis tells the story of her childhood during the Iranian Revolution. Through her story, it humanizes the Iranian people by not only separating them from the actions of their government, but by showing simple human experiences that we can all relate to and share. Pointedly and eloquently, she writes, "The world is not divided between East and West. You are American, I am Iranian. We don't know each other, but we can talk and we understand each other perfectly. The difference between you and your government is much bigger than the difference between you and me. And the difference between me and my government is much bigger than the difference between me and you. And our governments are very much the same. This divide between East and West, this sense of otherness pummeled into us by a propaganda machine media and hawkish governments, this could apply to any number of nations, including ours, and Israel. Yep, I'm going to dive into this horrifically controversial issue. And while I know I will more than likely incur the wrath of some people, it is not my intention to incur wrath. War and religion do enough of that on their own. Instead, I seek to follow that red thread of similarities through the people, outside of the governments that brutalize and draw peace signs with bullet holes. Last Tuesday, Netanyahu came to the U.S. to speak before Congress at a time when the U.S. is uncharacteristically using some diplomacy in the Middle East. But Netanyahu wants war. He's been ringing the alarm bells on Iran since the mid-90s, when he promised U.S. officials that Iran was 3 to 5 years away from developing nuclear weapons. Well, that didn't happen. It also didn't happen in 2012, when he again warned us of Iran's nuclear intentions with the help of what looked like a 10-year-old's D-grade science project. Or how about in 2002, when he claimed that ousting Saddam would make the Middle East safer and more stable? Of course, as we know, it had the exact opposite effect, and this is the point. More of that common sense shit that I mentioned at the beginning. War begets war. Hate begets hate. And when a corrupt, bloodthirsty leader claims to speak for not just an entire nation, but an entire people, he threatens the safety of those people by tying their cultural identity to his stupid fucking decisions. I grew up Jewish. And today, even as an atheist, I still have fond memories and great respect for many aspects of the Jewish culture and traditions. And I might be one of the few people that actually thinks gefilte fish is just fucking delicious. I'm proud of my Jewish heritage. The government of Israel is not my culture, just like the government of the US is not my culture, nor the government of Sweden. In fact, many aspects of these and other cultures were formed and evolved via dissension and criticism of government. So, as someone who is proud of their heritage and culture, I stand with Code Pink and their actions last week when they stood up to Netanyahu and the extreme right lobbying group AIPAC. I stand with Jewish Voice for Peace and Jews for Peace in general. I stand with the Israeli and Palestinian women who gathered at an Israeli checkpoint to protest the occupation only to be tear-gassed by Israeli security forces. I stand with the celebrities, artists, and activists behind the Gaza Names Project. I stand with the Israeli metal band Orphanland, who went on a European tour sharing a stage and a tour bus with the Palestinian band Khalas. And despite the official political rift and presence of devil's music, no one died. Apparently, they didn't even argue much, which is more than I can say for my band on tour. And Orphanland's lead singer admits to growing up hating the Palestinians. After a terror attack in his city as a child, he resigned himself to hating all Arabs, even spray painting on a wall at one time, "Death to Arabs." And now he sits next to this Palestinian band admitting, Israelis and Arabs are brothers. He gives simple suggestions on how to begin working on this conflict, again, by focusing on those similarities. Instead of starting to feed the kids with toy guns when they're 3 years old, we will start to just teach them about the value of life. I would take Israeli kids to visit Arab villages. I would take Arab kids to visit Israelis. They would play football together. They would learn about similarities in their languages. They would learn about history. They would learn how similar they are. Yes, you are similar. We are so similar. The difference between us is not in us, it is in our governments. And both governments have betrayed their people, have betrayed the hope for peace. Our governments are very much the same. The rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia reflects a misguided anger towards the sociopaths in power. It is not Muslims that you hate. It is not Jews that you hate. You hate, and rightfully so, the evil actions carried out in your name by the US, by Hamas, by Israel, by ISIS. These entities are not we the people. We must recognize this important difference. The terrorist actions of Israel are inexcusable, and the continued occupation of Palestine is a human rights violation for both Israelis and Palestinians. And don't take that from me. Take it from Amnesty International. The occupation of Palestine must end. Peace is not on the other side of war, it's on the other side of that fucking wall. The longer we separate ourselves by seeing people as governments, the longer we see only sides, not human lives, the longer we clutter our view with the haze of hateful rhetoric and blood-soaked diatribes, the longer we will suffer in this mire of war, hate, greed, phobia, and pain. So Netanyahu, you win the Low-Life Scum Award of the Week.
You low-life scum.
For your continued efforts to pull your country and mine into perpetual war, shitting on diplomacy and fueling extremist behavior both in this country and your own region. For having the fucking nerve to say that you speak for an entire culture as you put your own people and others into the crosshairs of a fully loaded gun. You do not speak for all Jews. You do not speak for me.
You low-life scum.
Wrapping up with this heavy controversial issue, I recommend that you check out heavy metal bands Orphanland and Khalas and stay tuned for more from both bands and their plans for the future. Orphanland lead singer Kobi Farhi says that one day their kids will start a band together. More music, more peace. And outside the realm of music, there's no shortage of creative expression surrounding this conflict, calling for peace and highlighting the plight of the people, including the recent underground, literally underground, mission by street artist Banksy, bringing art and the world's eye into Gaza. Take a look.
كويس جدا كويس توحي للعالم كله انه طلع كيف القصه هذه كيف لو صغار عندنا الاطفال اذا بدك لها قبه تلعب فيها اذا البسه لقيت لها لعب تلعب فيها.
Finally today, let's take a look at a couple of issues that you can and should join in this week's Frontlines segment. Firstly, a huge, gargantuan fuck yeah to all the activists responsible for pressuring Obama into vetoing the Keystone XL. I won't detail the entire Keystone XL plan here, but in short, it's a plan to build a pipeline from Alberta, Canada to the Gulf Coast, carrying 800,000 barrels per day of the dirtiest and most environmentally destructive oil, tar sands oil, across the US to be refined, exported, and burned. And now we're one step away from a phenomenal victory over corporate power, big oil, and dirty fossil fuel energy. President Obama has already vetoed the bill set forth by Congress, which the Senate then tried unsuccessfully to override last week. Now our continued pressure is required to make sure that Obama signs the final rejection of the Keystone XL. To read more about the fight to stop the pipeline and to add your name to the unity letter to President Obama, urging him to make that final rejection of the pipeline, visit this site and tweet out to the president with one of these tweets, or come up with your own message. Secondly, I am going to bring up the TPP again, because something that evil should get more airtime, and the mainstream media is too busy arguing over dress colors and finding rodent dogs in checked bags. And also, because this is really a week to act. Members of Congress have recess this week, and will therefore be home in their local districts, a captive audience to everything from sit-ins to projections to tweets, posts, and phone calls. Check out the link above to see memes and tweets from last week, and check out the link below to be automatically connected to your representative in order to say, no fast track, no TPP. And check out this link to get involved in some sick artful activism happening around the country. The last slide will be all the sites for the organizations and bands that I mentioned. If you're interested in my shirt, Surf's Up, it's from Occupy Venice, and you can find more information about them at the link below. Thanks so much for joining us. Good night, and act out.